Earlier this week, Moscow officially began a new phase of its war on Ukraine, shifting its attention to the largely Russian-speaking Donbas region in the east. Now, prior to the full-scale invasion, around a third of that region was run by Russian proxies who created pro-Moscow statelets 8 years ago. Well, with striking prescience, writer Andrey Kurkov explored the conflict from the perspective of a Ukrainian everyman who moves from the gray zone between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed troops to Crimea in his 2018 novel, Grey Bees, the French translation here. Well, he joins me on set for Perspective. Andrey Kurkov, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hello.
So I want to start by talking about Grey Bees, of course. Why write about the gray zone instead of about the separatist regions or the Ukrainian side?
Well, because I think the civilians who were left there, not only in the grey zone itself, because grey zone is actually the piece of land, stripe of land, which was 430 kilometers long. I mean, they were forgotten together with the villagers near front lines. And all the books which were written about the war, they were about heroes and anti-heroes, enemies, etc., battles, but not about civilians. So I wanted to give voice actually to civilian population who just found itself in the middle of the war and was trying to survive.
So speaking of those civilian populations then, one of the main characters, Sergei, seems to be relatively apolitical with a slight leaning towards the Ukrainian side, while the other main character, Pashka, works with pro-Russian separatists. At some point, he says that they're protecting Ukrainians. Why do you think, rather, that people in the East supported the separatists or even identified more with Russia than with Ukraine?
Well, what was happening actually, that Donbas region, which is a huge industrial area, was controlled by local oligarchs and local mafia for many, many years, for 30 years. So, I mean, these people actually didn't have access to information from Kyiv, and they were used to watch Russian TV channels, listen to Russian radio, read Russian newspapers. At the same time, they were paying with Ukrainian hryvnias and having Ukrainian passports. So, I mean, they were living like in between without thinking about this. Also, different political parties were not capable or able to open offices there because all was controlled by local pro-Russian political party, which changed names several times and every time was trying to become a party of the government. They succeeded with Yanukovych, and that was the party of region. And they wanted actually to expand the policy of this Russification and protection of Russian interests to the whole of Ukraine, which was the reason also, one of the reasons to start Euromaidan in 2013, 2014.
So now that there's been a full-scale war, obviously it's gone well beyond the borders of the Donbas region, do you think that that's changed the views of those who may have been Russian sympathizers in the past? I ask because France 24 recently did a report in Sviatohirsk, northern Donbas, where some residents interviewed actually said that they still support the Russian offensive.
Well, I think lots of people who were pro-Russian before the war, I mean, they became anti-Russian and they became much more pro-European and pro-Ukrainian. And I'm talking about mostly about residents, for example, of Odessa, of the south of Ukraine, and of some areas of Donbas also, and northern regions like Chernigiv region and Sumy regions, because I mean Chernigiv is partially destroyed, and this is also a big historical city with a large percentage of Russian-speaking population. So I mean, when you have your houses destroyed by Russians who come to say that, saying that they're coming to protect you from Ukrainians. I mean, will you still support Putin and the advances of the Russian army, which is destroying actually these cities like in the Second World War?
And moving forward, even though the end, unfortunately, is still not in sight, do you think that the fate of Donbas is something that will divide Ukrainian families in the same way that the Civil War did, for example, in the United States? What do you think are the prospects for unity? I ask also because I find it so, there's this beautiful innocence of the two main characters in your book being able to connect even though they have divergent views on the conflict.
I think there will be problems, but I mean, everything depends on the way the war will be stopped or ended. So, of course, I mean, the people who remained in Donbas after annexation, after actually separatists took over, I mean, they were either trying to adapt themselves to the new life, or they were pro-Russian sympathizers, or they had nowhere to go, because lots of refugees from Donbas returned to Donbas when they realized they cannot survive in other regions because they don't have work, they don't have money, nobody is really helping them from government administration. There will be problems. I mean, like there are problems now between relatives who live in Ukraine and relatives in Russia. Many of them restarted their contacts by phone, but they agreed not to talk about politics. I think actually these ties are broken again with the war.
I haven't gotten to this part of the book yet, but I understand that Sergei, who again was once apolitical, finds it harder and harder to be neutral. What was life like both in annexed Crimea and in the wider breakaway republics prior to the invasion?
Well, the life was not controlled by Kiev authorities, that was for sure. And actually, in both places, Russian secret forces were working very hard. In Donbas, actually, the pro-Soviet nostalgia was supported and financed by Russian special institutions. And for example, one of the favorite TV channels in Donbas was, and probably is for many people, is called Nostalgia. It's a Russian TV channel which broadcasts TV programs from the Soviet times and old Soviet films, very often in black and white, about good communists and bad Westerners. And what was incredible recently that several days ago, the Russians reinstalled Lenin monument in Genitchisk, in Kherson region, in front of the city administration, like just to show that this region is coming back to the good Soviet times. I don't think it will have a good effect or good impression on the local population, which is mostly actually pro-Ukrainian.
Now, I know that the main character also looks for a fellow beekeeper friend who's a Crimean Tartar. It's not something that we hear about often. Can you talk about the fate of Tartars after the annexation of Crimea?
Well, this is a tragedy because we are talking about 250,000 people who are suppressed now. I mean, everybody who was against annexation is either in prison or in detention. There are 12 or even more Crimean Tatar journalists who are arrested on false charges. There are 200 or 300 Crimean Tatar activists. And of course, I mean, the activists are immediately accused of terrorist activities or of belonging to different fundamentalist Muslim groups because Crimean Tatars are Muslim. So I mean, they have very tough times now. And actually, I mean, the world shouldn't forget about them. I mean, even one of the most liberal Crimean Tatar politicians and journalist, Nariman Jalal, was in the end actually put in prison, and he is awaiting sentence now. And actually, Russian authorities want to send him to prison for 20 years. He's accused of organizing a terrorist attack on the small gas line in a near village Perevalnoye. Well, I think the other village, but anyway, something very artificial. And actually, I mean, they even don't try to create some kind of more or less truthful story in order to accuse these people of things they don't commit.
Actually, before I get to that question, how do you think that moving forward, that Ukrainian identity, culture, and language can be preserved moving forward?
Well, everybody understands that actually Russian language, Russian culture has no future in Ukraine. I mean, there will be lots of people who will remain Russian speakers. I mean, I am myself Russian speaker, but I speak Ukrainian without accent. I write in Russian. But I am thinking now about actually not publishing my books in Russian and publishing them straight in the translation into Ukrainian language and in the other languages, because, I mean, it's such a shame now to be a Russian speaker, because, I mean, this war is actually waged against Ukrainian speakers. I mean, the purpose of the war is to de-Ukrainianize Ukraine, to destroy Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian identity, and to prove everybody that everybody in Ukraine is Russian, which is, of course, completely false.
And turning perhaps to you now, has the war changed you as a writer? Are you planning on continuing to write fiction throughout the war, or are you going to focus perhaps more on keeping the world informed as you are now on what's happening?
Well, I cannot write fiction anymore. I mean, I miss writing fiction. I was writing a new novel. I started a new novel before the war, and then I started writing articles and essays and my diary. And I am trying to explain what is happening. So actually, this is my duty now, as a duty of many Ukrainian writers. I hope to come back to writing fiction after the war. I don't want to remain in this state forever.
Andrey Kurkov, thank you so much for coming on France 24 today.
Thank you very much.
That's unfortunately all you have time for.